and I want to talk today about Jesus, the rest of the story. There was a guy named Paul Harvey who used to have a radio show called Paul Harvey Take the Rest of the Story. Or what was it? The Rest of the Story. That was the name of it, The Rest of the Story. So Paul Harvey would talk about the rest of the story, take news articles and talk about behind the scenes, what really happened. Today, I'm going to talk about what I believe really happened with Jesus. So this is Take What Rings True. So take what rings true to you and let the rest go. Some of the information I'm going to give you is from Holy Blood, Holy Grail, which is a book written by Henry Lincoln, Michael Benet, and some others. I'm also going to talk a little bit about Barbara Thiering's research, and she researched the beginnings of Christianity. I'm going to talk about what spirit guides have told us in trance classes, where Sylvia Brown would come and you would have her go to a bench and sit on the other side, and her spirit guide would come into her body and speak through her. And I'm going to talk about some past life regressions that I guided people to. History. History is his story. People would write what they believed happened from their point of view. However, it can be skewed for power, and their version of what happened is what's written down. History, his story. I believe Jesus has been misrepresented sometimes and intentionally sway people or changed what really happened for people's power. So I believe Jesus was a messenger from God. You can call him source or the universe, whatever. But I believe he came to give the new law that God is love. Jesus was and is the Son of God, as we are all sons and daughters of God. But he seems to have been created to be a special messenger. He came to earth and was born to a family that was wealthy and would probably be considered royalty in modern times. His dad had a carpentry business, actually a factory that made custom furniture, and he had at least 18 people working for him. So this was not a poor man. And because he came from a wealthy family, he was sent away to study. So he went to India, among other places, to study. And in India, you can still find him classified as a prophet. So Jesus was not a poor man. And when the Bible and people refer to him as saying, leave all your belongings, he was talking about leave all the stuff that is unneeded and just take what's true to you, what's true to your life, what's true to your belief. That's another thing that was misrepresented. Let me give you a couple of examples. I took a past life regression class and learned how to do past life regression, and I do it now. One of my first clients was a friend, and I took her to a past life, guided her to a past life, and she was talking about Jesus. But so many people say, oh, past lives are just made up. Well, she spent like half the session talking about how dusty it was. She's walking along this dusty path. Her sandals are so dusty. The room is so dusty. She keeps her scrolls in this urn, those clay pots that were really tall. She would keep her scrolls in there. And the next thing, she's talking to Jesus. She's talking to Jesus on a bridge, and she can see the road going up to a mountain that he's going to go and speak at in a few minutes. And the people traveling along the road to hear Jesus talk are bringing things with them. They're bringing fruit, they're bringing bread, they're bringing dried fish. And I realize this is the story of the loaves and the fishes. So, not wanting to lead her, I just ask her open ended questions. Although I'm very excited because I know this story. Okay, so she went back to where she was living, and Jesus went on to do his talk. And she was one of the scribes. She would write about his beliefs and his philosophy for people to read if they could read. However, since most of the people in those days could not read, Jesus spoke in parables. So when he talked about you only need the faith the size of a mustard seed, people knew what size a mustard seed was. It's like a little dot. If you took a pencil and made a little dot, that's how big a mustard seed is. So he was speaking in metaphors and parables so people could understand. So the stories in the Bible about Jonah and the whale is a parable that God is so powerful that somebody could be swallowed by a whale and survive because God is that powerful. Okay, so Jesus would tell stories so the people could understand what the beliefs were that he had, that he was trying to bring to the people, to find their own truth, to believe in God, that a God of love. Okay, another past life regression. Jesus was visiting a house, and this was Lazarus's house. And you know the story of Lazarus in the Bible. Perhaps you know that story. Spirit guides tell us that Jesus brought Lazarus back to life. However, he was not dead. He was actually having an epileptic seizure and was unconscious. Jesus was a healer and realized what was happening. And the reason that Lazarus was unconscious was because of a seizure. And he probably did give him a healing, but he just allowed Lazarus to come back to himself after an epileptic seizure. So when it's written in the Bible, it was written as Jesus brought Lazarus back to life and spent days. He'd been days dead, and all of a sudden, Jesus brought him back to life. Well, that makes a much better story than, okay, somebody had a seizure, was unconscious, and Jesus comforted him and allowed him to come back to life. So we have a scribe in the time of Jesus, and we have Lazarus in the time of Jesus. Now, Jesus would spend time at Lazarus's house, and Lazarus's sisters were Martha and Mary. So he would hang out at the house just like you would hang out with your friends and talk and have fun, and he loved to joke. Martha and Mary would go out and spread the philosophy, one person or two people at a time, because that's what women would do at that time. And Jesus and Lazarus would go out and talk to whole crowds, because that was the culture of the day. So Mary and Martha also were disciples, would spread the word that Jesus had brought to the earth. The story of Jesus is influenced by whoever's writing it. Many chapters in the Bible were written long after Jesus had died. Revelations was added 500 years later. And the Bible was really just a collection of writings that people brought together. The Emperor Constantine called the bishops of Asia and Europe to come to the Council of Nicaea, more than one council, but the first council in 325, that's 325 years after Jesus, they decided They should vote on whether Jesus was divine. They voted on when to celebrate Easter. They voted on which writings to include in the collection that became the Bible and which ones to eliminate. Now, Constantine wanted more power over the people, so his faction influenced the councils and brought more power to the patriarch. Instead of having women have much power, a lot of the things about women in the Bible were eliminated, or the wording in the Bible for women was to put them down, to say they were unclean, etc. So a lot of the writings were considered heretical. They were written by heretics, according to many on the council. Many of those writings were found later in the Dead Sea Scrolls that had been eliminated from the collection that became the Bible. So, a lot of things that Christ actually said were eliminated because they weren't of service to this group and the Bible. And since Constantine wanted power, then the things about the mother goddess were eliminated. The things about reincarnation were eliminated, because if you can be reincarnated, then you have another chance to live. It's much better for people to believe they only have one life, and that needs to be controlled by what the church says, and what the church says about the way to get to heaven. So a misrepresentation of Christ was, according to spirit guides who came in and taught, Christ actually said, "Our Father in heaven says, I am the way, the truth, and the light. And only till you and only until you go through me will you know what true salvation is." So going to God the Father, not Christ. Jesus did not say, "Pray, Jesus who art in heaven." He said, "Our Father who art in heaven." Okay, let's talk about the Immaculate Conception. Barbara Thiering did research and researched the Dead Sea Scrolls and as many documents and information that she could find, and found that in the days of Jesus, there were trial marriages. The first year of marriage was a trial marriage. And if a child was conceived during that time, it was considered a virgin birth. So Jesus was born during that time, so his was a virgin birth. Of course, the church wanted the myths to be followed, and every god or goddess that was conceived in ancient times was considered to have an immaculate conception. So Jesus needed to have an immaculate conception. So that's what the word was that went out, that Jesus had an immaculate conception, because that served the church better than, oh, it was a virgin birth because his mom and dad got married, and it was during the trial period of marriage that he was born. Let's talk about the trial and resurrection. Spirit guides told us that Jesus knew that Judas was going to notify the powers that be. He did not get silver for betraying Jesus. And even now, Judas is considered a horrible person, whereas really, if you know him on the other side, he's a wonderful person who volunteered to play this role in Jesus' life. Now, Jesus had direct report with God. That means he could talk directly to God and hear God or understand God. He knew that he was going to be maligned. He didn't quite know the extent that it was going to be, but he knew it was going to happen. Now, Pontius Pilate was really in league with Jesus. Of course, he had to follow the government and appear to be impartial, but he arranged for Jesus to be put on the cross on a holy day in the afternoon, which meant Jesus only spent 3 hours on the cross, because at sundown, the crosses needed to be taken down and the people needed to be taken down, because the observance of the Sabbath needed to take place. And on the Sabbath, you don't do work. So it was Jesus who was put on the cross. He was nailed to the cross, but it didn't break a whole bunch of bones, and it bypassed any arteries. So he was also given a footrest. He was also given ropes to help under his armpits to support him on the cross. And then about the third hour, he asked for water. And it had been prearranged that he would be given a concoction of vinegar and gall, which would cause his heart rate to slow, and he would become unconscious, mimicking death. Now, Pontius Pilate had messengers going from the area of the cross back to him and telling him what was going on. So he had given the order that because Jesus had, quote, died, that his legs not be broken, because they would break people's legs so they couldn't support themselves on the cross and they would die sooner. Well, since he had already, quote, died, then the centurion was told to lightly spear him. So he was speared on the side and he had no reaction whatsoever because he was unconscious. About the people wanting his clothing, people cast lots for his clothing. Well, who's going to cast lots for clothing of a ragged beggar, poor man? That did not happen. They wanted his clothing because it was made of fine imported material. His cloak was made of material that had no seams. It was all one piece of material. So, what about Jesus appealing to his mother at the cross? His personal earthly mother was not there. He was appealing to the mother goddess, his mother God on the other side. He knew he had to go through this, but it certainly was not a pleasant experience. What about the tomb? Joseph of Arimathea volunteered his tomb. Well, it was important for people in those days to have their own tomb and be ready to be buried in their tomb. Well, he gave up his tomb? No, he didn't. Pontius Pilate convinced him that he should volunteer his tomb and then explained that he should do it because it really wouldn't be used permanently. So Jesus came down from the cross. Nicodemus and Mary Magdalene brought him to the tomb, I assume on a wagon, and he was put in the tomb. And then they started to revive him. Well, in the dark of night, as they say, he was taken out and brought to Lazarus and Martha and Mary's house, and he recovered a bit there. And then he was taken to heaven. Heaven was the nickname for Qumran. Qumran was an Essene enclave. You can still visit now, the ruins of it, you can still visit now. And it's a place of study, a place of meditation, a place where people would go to learn about spirituality. And Jesus was an Essene. He went to heaven to recover. His followers had arranged for him to escape the area, leave the area. And when the time was right, when the tide was right, they had a boat ready for him and a few of the followers, his wife and who was Mary Magdalene, and his mom to go. They eventually got to France, but they had detours along the way. They went to Turkey, etc., before they got to France. Well, the followers let the people believe that Jesus had died because they didn't want people coming after him as he was going away someplace else. They didn't want people coming to get him because he was supposed to be crucified. So they let the rumor continue. And that's why it is said that Jesus died on the cross, even though he didn't. Now, when he got to France, he had family, he had children who eventually spread his word across Europe, etc., as his disciples were still spreading the word of what he believed in the Jerusalem area in the east. Now, the children still survive. His ancestors, his progeny, are still in the area of France. Actually, at one point in time, there were two Vaticans. There were two popes. I don't know if there was a Vatican in France, but there were two popes. There was a pope that was a descendant of Jesus, and there was the pope in Rome. Well, the popes in Rome didn't especially want to have another pope, so they invited the enclave, the main followers of Jesus, the Pope and his entourage, to go to Rome, and they were killed. So that stopped the Pope from being alive and well in France. There were still progeny of Jesus in France, and the people of France protected him and protect that information to this day. Holy Blood, Holy Grail, the people who studied for that and researched for that book went to the Biblioteca, which is a library in France. However, when the people in the library figured out that they were coming upon the research, the documents talking about Jesus, they closed the library to the public because they don't want that information getting out. They still protect that information. So the Biblioteca was closed, but the researchers still found where Jesus had lived in France. They found documentation and information about his family that's still there. I believe it's Albigensians. And they followed that information as best they could to write their book, Holy Blood, Holy Grail. So you might want to check that out. A lot of the Dead Sea Scrolls, when they were found, were disseminated to different groups to translate. And some of those, the ones that went to the church, the Christian church, are still hidden away and not fully translated and open to the public because it gives power to the people. It talks about things like Jesus said, ask and ye shall find, knock and it shall be open to you. If you can find your own information, then what do you need the church for? Well, Jesus did say two or more that gather together. Well, if you gather together in reality, it helps give you more power because if there's more than one person praying or more than one person working on something, say you want something, you're petitioning for something in your life, and you have some friends that help you to petition for that, it's a stronger request. So going to church provides a chance for people to get together in reality and have more power for requests and help each other. So one reason to have a church or to have a spiritual group is for people to get together and be more of a community and help each other. I took a Bible class once, Sylvia Brown taught, and we brought different versions of the Bible. I believe there were 26 different versions. We would read a passage and then compare the words in the different versions. They were so different. They could not all be the exact words of God, but I especially liked the version of Lamsa, Lamsa, because he translated the Bible from Aramaic, the language of Jesus, and his family had lived in the area of Jesus since the time of Jesus. So his book on the idioms of the Bible is great because it explains in reality what some of the things mean. So, you know the phrase, it's raining cats and dogs? Well, we know it wasn't really raining cats and dogs. It just means, it's an idiom that means it's raining a lot. It's raining a bunch. So Lamsa explains what the idioms are and what things really mean from the Aramaic point of view. And, okay, so somebody said this is cool. Of course, because it's real. Well, real in my opinion and from my research. So the Bible, especially when it talks about women, some of the passages in some of the Bibles are horrendous about the unclean women and how horrible we are. Well, that's a way to keep women down if you don't consider them worthy. And the patriarchal rule wanted power, so they didn't want very much power going to women. When Mary and Jesus got to France, you can find a cathedral that's dedicated to Mary. She started like a sort of like a university, a study area where you would go and learn about the philosophy and learn spiritual things that she believed and Jesus believed. And she became the main source of the information going out, because Jesus was still stepping back and making sure people weren't going to come kill him. Oh, my light went out. Okay. Anyway, you can still see me. So there are many more things that could be said about the reality and my belief, my truth from my research about Jesus. And maybe we'll do that another time. So thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. You can check out more about this by reading Holy Blood, Holy Grail. You can also read about Barbara Thiering's research. So check it out. I hope to see you next Wednesday for Take What Rings True, and thanks for joining me.